Welcome, twice welcome to JWC Livestream. This is Sublimated Poesy with David and Ricky. This is the place you come to sponge up the transcendent force of poetry, like so much gravy on your Thanksgiving plate. We all hope you enjoyed your meal. You know I did. And today we have with us David Anderson, JWC's resident poet. David, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. Getting back to the grind. It's that heavy Monday, but everything's okay. It's nice to have the holiday. Now it's over. We could get back to our normal writing schedule, which is cool. I was glad to see a bunch of people that I saw over the break. I got some writing done, but it was mostly, you know, having to chill with people because, you know, if they come from all over the place, you're not going to see them for years. So I didn't get as much writing done as I wanted to, but the stuff I did was great anyway. It was inspirational in its own way. How was your break, David? And how's your creative life been lately?
My break was fine. I wrote 4 new poems, did some extended reading. Every now and then it's very good for a writer to stop writing and start reading again.
Absolutely.
And I recommend that to every writer.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yes. So I've been reading Yukio Mishima's Spring Snow and a couple of other books. So I highly recommend our listeners check out Yukio Mishima as an author. He's quite remarkable. The concerns are very, they're interested in Western ideas filtered through Japanese culture in this novel. So it's a good approach for someone as a writer to think of if we want to write about ourselves, sometimes we have to write as if we're an outsider looking in. It's one approach that a writer can take. It's writing about something and filtering it through their perceptions and their ideas, their prejudices and their approvals, what have you. So definitely check him out. He's a fantastic author. So that's what I did over the holidays. I read and I wrote poetry. It was time well spent.
Yes, putting the author's awareness as a filter, so that the act of discovery, the revelation of what they're experiencing, bleeds through the voice and comes out on the page. There's countless authors that benefit from that technique, and it certainly is an excellent piece of advice. And what you said before that concerning reading, online I see all these people in the comments, I have writer's block, what am I going to do? And it's like, I'm not trying to jinx myself or anyone else, but if you have writer's block, like, read. The first thing is read. Then there's listen to music, take a walk, go over your stuff and edit a little bit. Just whatever it is you're doing, that sameness, do differentness. That's all it is, really. Your consciousness will shift and compensate, Thankfully, thank God, I haven't had block. I hope I never do. The idea of it horrifies me, but your advice there, read, folks. Just pick up a book. The inspiration will strike you again. It's just the muse is probably just taking a nap,
I actually think that there's no such thing as writer's block. I think that writer's block is someone postponing their work. That's how I look at it. sit down in front of your computer, start typing. You will throw out everything that you first write. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you wrote. It's a daily practice. Call it a spiritual practice if you prefer. Call it a form of exercise. But it's your communion with the powers of creativity, and it's essential that you don't make excuses. It's to say that you're blocked and it seems hopeless. I just hear a person quitting. I know that sounds like a terrible thing to say, but I actually I'm hearing someone who doesn't want to be a writer, actually.
What David's saying, though, it sounds like a 10-pound sledgehammer, but really it's exactly the truth. It's as delicate as a rapier and as deadly. The truth behind the matter is that if you willed yourself into a place where there was no writer's block, which is what I try to do, it's just not possible. Like, you just say, nope. Like, and if it's not coming, it's because you're not getting out of your own way, or your life is too busy. You're not paying enough attention to the muse. There's something going on. And ultimately, you won't feel right. You got to just give it time, isolate, meditate on, just like slow down. You're probably just moving too fast, But I love David Anderson's, that attitude you just displayed. There's no such thing as writer's block. Don't even give it the idea that it can exist. That's a way to deal with it, to me.
Yes, I agree. By giving it some legitimacy, you're giving it space in your mind.
Yep.
To have some kind of control. So it's like a psych out. You're telling yourself that I can't do this because I don't have any ideas. Mm-hmm. You have ideas. You just have to sit down and start writing. And the worst ideas often become the best ideas. It just takes a lot of work.
Yeah, it's some kind of toxic loop you're in. Like, just push past it. And you do that by looking for the fun. Like, read something beautiful, listen to something beautiful, it'll come. That's excellent piece of advice. It's almost like we cut to the wisdom first here. Some of our episodes do that, folks. But be that as it may, the creative check-in wasn't very expansive because of the holiday. Next week, no doubt, we'll have better to submit. Today's sort of general theme is prose poetry, verse narrative prose. Well, our format generally is we read a poem, we talk about it. We read a prose piece, we talk about it. Today we have 2 poems and a prose piece, but I have a feeling we will get to the bottom of this little truth nugget here. Prose poetry versus narrative prose, and what are the differences? So the first one we'll read is August by Mary Oliver. So thank you for sharing that screen, David. Our neighbor, tall and blonde and vigorous, the mother of many children, is sick. We did not know she was sick. She has come to the fence walking like a woman who is balancing a sword inside of her body. Besides that, her long hair is gone. It is short and suddenly gray. I don't recognize her. It even occurs to me that it might be her mother. But it's her own laughter-edged voice. We have heard it for years over the hedges. All summer, the children, grown now, and some of them with children of their own, come to visit. They swim. They go for long walks at the harbor. They make dinner for 12, for 15, for 20. In the early morning, 2 daughters come to the garden and slowly go through precise and silent gestures of Tai Chi. They all smile. Their father smiles too and builds castles on the shore with the children and drives back to the city and drives back to the country. A carpenter is hired, a roof repaired, a porch rebuilt, everything that can be fixed. June, July, August, every day we hear their laughter. Think of the painting by Van Gogh, The Man in the Chair. Everything wrong and nowhere to go. His hands over his eyes. Well, that's a pretty one. I liked at the end, the June, July, August. Every day we hear their laughter. You could just imagine the summer going from mild to humid to oppressively hot, and all those skies and all those storms. I've seen many summers working out in the field, so it's easy for me to just furnish that. And the transformation of her, they're noting how she didn't recognize her. That little bit about the balancing a sword inside her body, it's like a swallower or whatever. Her long hair gone, laughter edged voice. I mean, this is just real tasty. The coming of the sick watch, the family, those who are concerned, and this Tai Chi, like all these little elements. I think it's really, really well done. What did you think of that read, David, and the poem? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, the read was excellent. The poem is I vary. I have a deep passion for Mary Oliver's poetry, so it's hard for me to be completely objective about her poetry. But this poem reads so simply, and so it's written with such clarity and truth that when you reach the last stanza with the reference to the Van Gogh painting, it's heartbreaking. It is for me. This idea of a father, a husband losing his wife, it's like the entire balance of the family is being undone. And it's very powerful poem, very clear, strong language, which is something that I have always stressed with my students. Write clearly, write strongly, write simply, write bravely, and you will find it. And this is a fine example of prose poetry.
Yeah, I'm forced to agree. I mean, I think it's, well, definitely something to be studied because of all that she unpacks and the poetry besides. I mean, it's a wonderful little piece, wonderful voice. I'm totally about that. So we have 2 little poems today, which is nice. It's nice. They're all nice, really. But in this case, we're looking for something. This is A Season in Hell by Arthur Rimbaud, translated by Bertrand Mathieu. A while back, if I remember right, my life was one long party where all hearts were open wide, where all wines kept flowing. Marvelous. One night I sat Beauty down on my lap, and I found her galling, and I roughed her up. I armed myself against justice. I ran away. Oh, witches, oh, misery, oh, hatred, my treasure's been turned over to you. I managed to make every trace of human hope vanish from my mind. I pounced on every joy like a ferocious animal, eager to strangle it. I called for executioners so that while dying, I could bite the butts of their rifles. I called for plagues to choke me with sand, with blood. Bad luck was my god. I stretched out in the muck. I dried myself in the air of crime. And I played tricks on insanity. And spring brought me the frightened laugh of the idiot. So just recently, when I found myself on the brink of the final squawk, it dawned on me to look again for the key to that ancient party where I might find my appetite once more. Charity is that key. Oh, man. This inspiration proves what I was dreaming. You'll always be a Hannah, etc., yells the devil, who crowned me with such pretty poppies. Deserve death with all your appetites, your selfishness, and all the capital sins. Ah, I've been through too much. But sweet Satan, I beg of you, a less blazing eye. And while waiting for the new little cowardly gestures yet to come, since you like an absence of descriptive or dialectic skills in a writer, let me rip out these few ghastly pages from my notebook of the damned. Now that's a powerful little bullet right there. Marvelous, really. He gets to realize his decadence, and he seems like he misses it, and then he goes to try to recreate it, it seems, and then there's a bit of trouble. I tell you, I have a lot I could relate to in this poem, an awful lot. I too enjoyed my wine at one point. What poet doesn't, right? I mean, it's just magnificent. It's so good. I feel like I could just read it again. And if this were not a show, I would read it again. There's so much, it's like compact. There's so much encoded in Rimbaud. There's just so much that's waiting there to be picked apart. And such a voice, such purity. There's nothing not to like about it. David, what did you think of the read and the poem, sir? Well picked. Both of these well picked.
Oh, the read was excellent. It's an amazing work. It was something that it was his last major work, A Season in Hell. And let's keep in mind that this poet stopped writing at the age of 19. So this was written before he was 19 years of age.
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to even discuss what I was doing at 19. It did not involve literature. So unfortunately, I have to live in his shadow. But it's not an unpleasant shadow to live in. It's very highly stylized, dramatic language, but it has authenticity to it. So it's not just show. This is true agonizing expressions of a kind of transformation, a realization. And the wonderful electric lines. I called for executioners so that while dying, I could bite the butts of their rifles. I called for the plagues to choke me with sand, with blood. Bad luck was my god. I stretched out in the muck. I dried myself in the air of crime, and I played tricks on insanity.
Beautiful, isn't it?
It's marvelous, and it's a cry. It's like an utter cry into a void. That's what it is to me. So
it's as beautiful as a bird in flight, this poem. Like,
it's ugly and raw too. It's not pretty. It's I'm sure Bukowski would have approved of this very much. I don't know what his opinion on Rimbaud would be, but I'm sure that he would recognize all of these states of hysteria and hallucination.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that he hadn't read Rimbaud and had a place in his heart for such. Though yes. though he was very critical and impossible to a degree, I still think, I mean, what's not to like about that? You know, we'd have to sit down and have an argument with him over wine and hope to not be picking glass out of our scalp by the end of it. You know, that's kind of how that man operated, you know?
Yes.
Well, that was a magnificent thing, those two poems. And already I'm starting to see some interlinkage, some like purpose there. I'm sorry, David, you were saying?
I was going to say, we can stop here and talk about what a prose poem is, or we can wait until after we've read the fiction work. It's your decision, of course.
Well, why don't you explain to the audience what is a prose poem, the way that you see it?
The way I see a prose poem is having the typographically, it's set out much like fiction would be set out in paragraphs, in blocks, with no necessary enjambments or typical metrical devices that you would have in verse. But it does use highly stylized metaphoric and language and symbolism. So it's a very concentrated sort of visual and oratory kind of speech. So it's much like, I liken it to, I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church. So I was used to very powerful sermons, much like this sort of thing in this kind of spirit, because there's like in A Season in Hell, there's this kind of religious reckoning that's going on. But it's not being done for the sake of God. It's being done for the sake of, he's actually trying to draw attention to himself. This is a young man writing. This is a young man saying, I lived, I sinned, I existed, and I did wicked, horrible things. I was human in every sense of the word. So it's basically a prose poem will have highly concentrated metaphoric language. It'll use lots of symbolisms and similes and things of that nature, which are very common in regular poetry, but it's always presented in a simple format that looks like it might just be a piece of fiction, but it's not. It's a sort of this if you look at poetry and fiction on a spectrum, you'll have poetry on the left, the far left, metrical verse, let's say. And on the far right, you'll have narrative fiction. And there's this field in between. And what exists in the center or towards the center is a prose poem, actually. So it's sort of like a marriage between these two forms of expression. That's how I would define a prose poem.
That was excellent breakdown. To boil it down, you would say it's prose poem is a poem without a verse. It's a poem in a paragraph.
Right. Yeah, you could say that. Yes, excellent.
Yeah. So because all that other stuff is a marvelous breakdown of it, though, as far as like its analysis of typeset and where it comes from as far as the muse is concerned. But that's excellent, David. This one too, this poem, it's like he says God is his bad luck is his God, and he petitions to the devil so that he has less of his eye on him. You know, he's like, give me another gesture. Just a fantastic situation there. And
there's a reference. I'm sorry to interrupt. There's like a reference here to poppies. It's well known that Rimbaud took opium.
Well, I only assumed that that's what he was getting at when he
Yes.
dropped that little when he dropped that little nugget in there.
So
But
it's very possible this was a hallucination, like a nightmarish hallucination of some type.
it could very well be, if he was in some sort of a tripped out or a strung out situation
Yes.
after all those many wines and dandles of his. Well, that was marvelous. So now we move on to the prose piece. This is Ernest Hemingway. In Our Time is the book, chapter 10 from that book. One hot evening in Milan, they carried him up onto the roof, and he could look out over the top of the town. There were chimney swifts in the sky. After a while, it got dark, and the searchlights came out. The others went down and took the bottles with them. He and Ag could hear them bellowing on the balcony. Ag sat on the bed. She was cool and fresh in the hot night. Ag stayed on night duty for 3 months. They were glad to let her. When they operated on him, she prepared him for the operating table, and they had a joke about friend or enema. He went under the anesthetic, holding tight to himself so that he would not blab about anything during the silly talky time. After he got on crutches, he used to take the temperature so Ag would not have to get up from the bed. There were only a few patients, and they all knew about it. They all liked Ag. As he walked back along the halls, he thought of Ag in his bed. Before he went back to the front, they went into the Duomo and prayed. It was dim and quiet, and there were other people praying. They wanted to get married, but there was not enough time for the banns, and neither of them had birth certificates. They felt as though they were married. They wanted everyone to know about it and to make it so they could not lose it. Ag wrote him many letters that he never got until after the armistice. 15 came in a bunch, and he sorted them by the dates and read them all straight through. They were all about the hospital and how much she loved him, and how it was impossible to get along without him, and how terrible it was missing him at night. Through the armistice, they agreed he should go home to get a job so they might be married. Ag would not come home until he had a good job and could come to New York to meet her. It was understood he would not drink. He did not want to see his friends or anyone in the States, only to get a job and be married. On the train from Padova to Milan, they quarreled about her not being willing to come home at once. When they had to say goodbye in the station at Padova, they kissed goodbye, but were not finished with the quarrel. He felt sick about saying goodbye like that. He went to America on a boat from Genoa. Ag went back to Torre di Masta to open a hospital. It was lonely and rainy there. And there was a battalion of Arditi quartered in the town. Living in the muddy, rainy town in the winter, the major of the battalion made love to Ag, and she had never known Italians before. He finally wrote a letter to the States that theirs had been only a boy and a girl affair. She was sorry, and she knew he would probably not be able to understand, but might someday forgive her and be grateful to her. And she expected, absolutely unexpectedly, to be married in the spring. She loved him as always, but she realized now it was only a boy and girl love. She hoped he would have a great career and believed in him absolutely. She knew it was for the best. Major did not marry her in the spring or any other time. Ag never got an answer to her letter to Chicago about it. Short time after, he contracted gonorrhea from a salesgirl from the fair riding in a taxi cab through Lincoln Park. Oof. That's a real kick in the rear end, that one.
Yeah, that's pure Hemingway too.
No,
I
yeah.
went through a lot of choices before I picked on this one. I picked this one because I grew up reading Hemingway, and he's the master craftsman in American fiction.
Yeah, clearly. So there's a lot of like little bits and pieces of deeply personal agony there, and it's the idea that they have this dream and it just disintegrates, and all of his goals that were going to support the dream, they basically became useless as the dream dissolved. And just taking that decision from him, and not, he has no say. Off you go to get a job, and then I'll come when you get a job. And then he got a job, and then it never happened. It's like, who could possibly be satisfied by that outcome? It's like, it's a terrible deconstruction of what was supposed to be marvelous. It was a whole lifetime burned away like fog in the morning. Not unlike what Bukowski says in Love is a Dog from Hell. Brutal, honestly. They all were probing and sharp. The sick woman, the moment in hell when he realizes all those things about his life, and now this, where this dream just explodes, it disintegrates. That's all very brutal. Wonderful voice, but overall it's the stories themselves is very very taxing, demanding, emotionally. Well, what did you think of that passage, David, and the read?
The reading was excellent. The passage is in our time is one of my favorites. It's not assigned much in schools, and that's a pity. But the one thing I have to think about when I'm looking at these characters is that this is set in the backdrop of a war, and that's just a very different world than a world at peace. And so love in those circumstances between men and women heats up, sometimes simply because they're under this apprehension that maybe that it'll be the end, that this is their last chance to share something of that kind of experience together. So it's very romantic, but it's also very hard. It's almost a little vulgar when we get to the end, and he mentions about getting gonorrhea from a sales girl. It's not the kind of thing that I think people of that era would have enjoyed reading in the paper or in a magazine. Hemingway was a journalist. So he started out as a journalist, and that's where he learned his precision, is through the strictures of writing for newspapers and magazines. And it served him very well when he began crafting his stories and his novels. And I think the real difference between fiction and poetry is that, well, you've put it rather well sometimes. I mean, it may sound like an insult, but there are a lot more flowers in the Mary Oliver and in the Rimbaud than there is in in the Hemingway. And I think that Hemingway, I don't know much about his opinion on poetry, but I think he might not be impressed by so many flowers in his text.
No, I feel like he got to the point. Like, he gets to the point. He's not smelling as many roses, but there's plenty of thorns. The brutality of the story, like all of those things had a beginning, middle, and end, you know, and they were all like an unpacking of a recollection. Um, and they each gave me a little bit of image and a little bit of fondness, you know, like I plugged into all three very, very easily. But the Hemingway one wasn't really messing around, you know, and that it does have to do with how it hits the paper. Like what we were talking about before concerning the prose poem, it's like you don't think of verse. You're writing a poem as a paragraphic poem. Um, there's a lot to be said about the simplicity of how it hits the paper. Like you're saying how Hemingway was a journalist. I knew that. What I knew about journalism too is like when you write journalism and you write for a typeset, you write for a word budget, you write to fit in a specific place on the page. It trains your muse, you know, your muse adapts to that. And that's the key is he doesn't have as much time for flowers. It's more like where we're going. It's not like on our way getting there with him. Because, you know, when you pick up a newspaper off a newsstand and it's late and you just want to get home, or it's early and you're going to work, or it's lunchtime and you need something to read, you want to get there and you want to read a thing. If you're a poet or you love poetry, then maybe you're not going to buy a newspaper. Narrative is just, it's more temporal, like by its nature. No matter how many flowers you throw on the top of the casket, it's still, you know, beginning, middle, and end. Like it has to do its thing. And I think that's like the difference here. And the more and more I realize it about all that, like when it comes to form and stuff or style, it really does have to do with how it hits the page. It's the most important thing. And the school that that you're channeling, like, is it journalism? Is it poetic sketches? Is it flash fantasy? You know, is it formalism? Like you're getting a very, very specific type of a verse, you know? The language has to step through that. And you have to see, like, what is the fruit of that interaction? So it's an industrial component. We talk we talk at JWC events about the networking of minds and the idea that there's consciousness, which is we're awake, and unconsciousness, which is we're dreaming. And inspiration lives between those two poles. And there's this cycle that goes on for the creative. And the creative obsessor seeks to expedite that cycle and keep its frequency, you know, high repetition. But every once in a while, you get into that superposition. But no matter how inspired you are and what your word yield is, it has to do with the way the words hit the page. How does that find you, David? Like, again, a prose poem is a paragraphic poem. So that's its prose contact. And there are plenty there's plenty of prose that's poetic, but in the case of Hemingway, his journalism makes it so that it's like deeply narrative, but the story is shocking or upsetting or you know, it's like you watch a dream come into existence and then die. It's not that it's poetic, but it's profound, you know? So what is that? What's the relationship behind this dance between all these components, you know?
One thing that I can relate then in my experience, and I've written a fair number of short stories, and I'm working on a novel right now and drafting ideas for other novels, is that my first duty to as a fiction writer, as an author, is to the narrative and telling the story. Now, as a poet, my first duty is to language. So it's you're serving two different masters in a certain way. It could be seen in that way. Now, we reviewed, I think it was a couple of weeks back, we did Malcolm Lowry. Now, there was an intense amount of symbolism and metaphor and imagery in that text that you read. And that was about a state of drunkenness. So I guess my point is the field is completely open. It should be open. It shouldn't be divided into, there shouldn't just be, poetry should just be verse or metrical verse, or poetry shouldn't just be free verse, or poetry shouldn't just be a prose poem even. And fiction, we have the same issue at hand. Fiction should be about the liberation of the mind for a time on the page.
Yep.
That's really the goal, a transcendence. And you can do it with both. I regard fiction as equal to poetry as an art form. I think they both can achieve marvelous things in the hand of a master. And I specifically chose Hemingway as a stark example of what narrative fiction is. That was very cut and dry story. There was no sentimentality to it. It was as if he was reporting in a newspaper the facts of this romance between this woman and this man. And it was beautiful. It was very clean, and it was unsentimental. And I have a feeling that it was written for adults and not for young people, because it doesn't have any of the sentimentality about romance. And to end it so harshly in the way he did, that's sort of like
brutality.
Yeah, it's he just came up and decked you, knocked you right on your ass with that ending. Yeah. So it's very brutal.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like we were falling down the stairs from,
yes.
I mean, even before halfway through, like the minute they were arguing and they were leaving on those terms, it's like he establishes this tension.
Yeah.
And it is brutal. It feels dangerous. Like you're upset for him. You empathize immediately. And for her to a certain extent, because there's just this confusion, but I think we're talking about something. I think there's poetry and there's anti-poetry. There's almost like this type of brutal detail, like it's not a lot of details. It's this brutal honesty. It's this matter of factness, like it's the equivalent. It's not flowers. It's like the equivalent of a car accident. And then you're watching as there's rescue work and there's this and there's that. You're trying to reconcile all these terrible simplicities. And then
he kind of sobers us up, doesn't he? I mean, at the end of that story, I mean, we haven't spent the evening drinking with Mr. Hemingway, and we have said something that's upset him. He stands up and he just knocks us down the stairs, It's like,
yeah, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, it's like he wakes us up from that prose poetry really sharply with that. So I think they do kind of work together in an odd way. Seemingly, they wouldn't seem to relate in any way, but the purpose and the point of what I'm trying to do is show people how writers think and how writers can play.
Well, it's a wonderful diminishing. It's very, very accurate to watch the seasons of all three of these stories play out, regardless of their flowers. They all have a sort of devastation that they're suggesting. And it's a question of that diminishing, that gross diminishing or subtle diminishing. You know, the prose, the Hemingway ended up making it where it was brutal and quick. Like I said, it's almost like it was a bubble and it burst and it vanished, or it was a fog that got cooked away. The other ones, there was like a brief cycle of meandering, and there was some flowers, there was some exploration. But with this, it was just kind of like, yep, this is this. We're gonna do this. Everything's gonna be great. And then it starts to suck. It starts to fly apart. So it's that question, folks. As far as the wisdom of all this is concerned, is how do you capture a diminishment? You know, how do you quantify the ending of a dream, or the realization that something is not the way it should be? You know, an unwelcome change, or the annihilation of personal goals, or the life you thought you were leading was never what you thought it was, or it's over now. You know, reading all these things, it kind of gives you that notion. It helps you to know how to convey these unpleasant things. Because when I was reading the Hemingway, it was a question of tension. Right away, I was like, oh no, you know, this person is this and that. And the other one, the Rimbaud, it was better. It was easier for me to relate to because of my own past. And all of them are a little dark, or all not like mysterious, you know. So it's like, it's not a question always of clarity. Again, it's a question of the mystification and stuff, and who these things speak to. Like all three of them, they're saying a thing. They're like, hold on, you know, hold on to what you have, because it's going to be over before you know it. And how do you convey such urgency on the page? You know, that discontent, that disorientation, that you're oh, I'm not as young as I used to be, or I'm not healthy anymore, or wow, this is over and it never happened. It's like I lived a life, I saw a picket fence, and it's like it never happened. Really just excellent, man. Very, very good choices. So that's kind of our thing, folks, is the subtle diminishment or the gross diminishment. The subtle realization or the gross realization as you discover that something's just not quite right. How do you capture that on the page? Well, I think we got a pretty good lesson today. Check those out, those poems. I used to be a poet. I used to be nothing but a poet. This is like 15, 20 years ago. And poetry is powerful. It taught me a lot. I would never be where I am were it not for my origins with Poesy. Writing hundreds of poems, taking notebooks to parties, to jobs, walking around, looking at things, sketching them, developing the wordplay, getting the poetic voice fulfillment down. And there's something to be said about that as far as the flowers. But then there's this concept of the anti-poem, the unpoem, which is this, and prose poems start to stretch into it with the concept of the paragraphic poem. And I remember waking up one day and I was just like, I have to, because I didn't learn the way you're supposed to learn. You were supposed to write a bunch of short stories, and every short story I ever wrote was miserable. Like I hated it. It's changed, thankfully. I've learned a lot in these last 2 decades, but the point behind it is I was trying to learn how to describe through poetry, and poetry is good for that. And I didn't learn from short stories. I learned more from journalistic techniques of how to budget a page and how to get a narrative out, beginning, middle, and end, the act structures. it took journalism for me to learn. And I was writing stories and stuff, and I knew the elements, but it's like they were all lacking something. And in this particular case, you learn it's like journalism's telling you the 1, 2, 3 of what's going on. A lot of times it doesn't have room for flowers, but the flowers of a poem, when they meet the discipline and the form of journalism, you can get some amazing voice combinations. You can do some amazing things when those two forces come together on the page. So practice it out, you know, write a poem every day and write like a 500-word article every day, and start to see how those works, those projects begin to shape your voice, get you ready for chapter writing, get you ready for short story writing. You know, sometimes we're tracked over too much into the flowers. Coming from me, that's almost crazy to hear come out of my mouth because I'm Mr. Flowers. But sometimes you got to come over here to narrative a little bit. Sometimes you got something that has to be said. It's not just how it's said. It's why, for what reason. Sometimes it has to be a story. And those 3 acts, it's the binding force of the universe, beginning, middle, and end, birth, life, death, you know? So this has been a great show. We learned a little bit about the subtle diminishment versus the gross diminishment, and a prose poem versus a narrative prose poetry versus narrative prose. There's a lot to be learned from that sort of stuff. I want to thank David Anderson, our resident poet, for setting this up and coming on the show today. I love doing these shows because there's always something cool that comes out of these combinations that we read and the discussions we have. Drop it on our comments and head over and make some posts on our YouTube page and let us know what you think of this stuff. Anyone who's listening, who's looking for this inner wisdom will find it, because I'm learning stuff from this, just putting it all in perspective and unpacking it. It's like, wow, there's certain episodes of these shows, it's like I sit there and I'm like, I never thought of it that way, and I'm the one that's doing the show. So it's really great. Thank you again, David, for coming on. Head on over to joeswritersclub.com. Check out our author bios and our blogs. Go to joeswriters.club. Join our forums. Head over to our social media, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. And I'll say it again, our YouTube channel, JWC Livestream on YouTube. Like and subscribe, please. The more followers we have, the more we can help people, the more we can get the message out, our unique doctrine that we're trying to work out here. Thanks a lot for listening and watching. It's been a great show. You guys take care. David, farewell. Thanks again.
You're welcome. You have a nice